Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Cloud with Chris. You are with me, Chris Reddington. Here we talk all things cloud. And of course, you may be aware in the past we did a series all about cloud design patterns and cloud software architecture. And this has really been a theme of the channel. And we're not done yet, is what I would say. There's still plenty more that we can keep exploring. There's always anti-patterns we can learn from, patterns we can learn from. But of course, you'll notice the area that I typically focus on is software development, software design, and it's probably an area we haven't maybe approached as much on the channel. It's been more of that typical infrastructure cloud architecture side. So I'm delighted today actually to be joined by a good friend who I've met at several events now. I think South Coast Summit and South Coast User Group amongst others, Microsoft Build as well. He's here with me, so we'll bring him in, is John Kilminster. Hey, John.
Hi.
How are we doing, sir? You well?
Yes, all good, thank you. Yes.
Good, good. Now, probably worth starting with intros. Of course, we've met several times, but several folks listening in may not have had the opportunity. So over to you, sir.
Yeah, so I'm a software architect. I've done many different roles at different companies, primarily in e-commerce and like high transaction websites and things like that. And over the last 6 or 7 years, I've taken more of an Azure slant on things. So although I've stayed true to being a software engineer and working with the software, it's always with an eye on how we can deploy that into the Azure infrastructure. And
Sure.
designing Azure infrastructure really kind of dovetails really nicely into the software. Although you can write the software kind of agnostic on the platform, it's better if you think about both sides of it.
Absolutely.
So that's kind of my background.
Nice. Good. And I think you nailed it there as well. You know, I think poor performing software will be poor performing no matter where you run it. So if you can kind of optimize it, make sure that you're doing things in a well architected way, you know, you're going to be getting the benefits of the platform and could potentially be reducing things like cost in the long run as well, right? So definitely worth thinking about both sides of the coin. And one other point we should also add on for yourself as well is you recently became an MVP as well. So congratulations for that.
Oh, thank you.
Yes. So exciting times ahead. So thank you for all of the contributions I've at least seen in the community, and of course the many more to come as well. So we're going to be talking all about tools of a software architecture for everyone. So John, where should we start?
Yeah, so over my time as a sort of software architect, I've picked up various tools and methodologies and things, and I really wanted to kind of bring them and have a bit of a chat about them. We've discussed, Chris, a few times when we've bumped into each other about, have you seen this tool? Have you seen that tool? And yeah, I thought it'd be good to kind of share. But as to where to start, I think it might be worth taking like a step back and kind of talking about, well, what is a software architect?
Sure.
For people who are maybe in an infrastructure-based role and hear about these software architects, or people who are maybe a mid or senior developer and think, well, there's this other role that I see in my organization or isn't in my organization, and we might be missing it. So yeah, I think that might be a good place to start, really.
Yeah, sounds good. And I guess there's sometimes this misnomer maybe or misclassification that progression within software development looks something like, you know, developer or junior developer, senior developer goes on to kind of architect. And it's not necessarily a progression, as maybe more of a sidestep, I guess. Maybe that's a good place to start for us.
Yeah, I think that's really true. I mean, not all organizations have a dedicated software architect.
Very true.
And software architecture, you know, is a task in a way done by nearly all software engineers. But when it becomes a separate role, what tends to be the focus of that role is taking more of a long-term view or taking a step back. So if, say, you've got 10 different software teams, making sure that you put the guardrails in place. You want the teams to be autonomous, but equally, if every team randomly chooses a technology and then the people in that team disband or go somewhere else, you're left with a technology that nobody else understands. So it's partly that. It's partly investigation between different third-party options. So maybe you need new feature flag system, and you decide, okay, well, there's 4 different companies we could go to. Once you've got past the commercials, you need a technical person to advise on it, and you don't necessarily want to be taking out a key software engineer that's in the middle of a project. So the architects can help with that kind of vision and kind of roadmap planning.
Sure.
And then there's things that cover, if you have got multiple teams, there's tasks that kind of cover multiple teams, or those individual teams might need to rely on someone with a bit more experience. So yeah, it's a different type of role than just necessarily a progression from going up through sort of junior, mid, senior. It is a different type of work. You need that kind of, I guess, looking forward at things and more holistic approach. You could probably look at it more like going from a team lead to a department manager kind of progression. That when you go between those 2 roles, you're looking more at the bigger picture, and it's very much similar, I would say, in a software architect role.
Yeah, and I guess what I was kind of thinking there as you were explaining that as well is maybe the reason there's that perception is because actually to get towards that almost software architect kind of view, you need to have some of those battle scars that you've picked up along the way, being part of those projects where, as you say, the team have disbanded, or maybe not the wrong choice, because there's always different choices, let's say, but maybe there was a reason to go one way and actually it turned out to be maybe a poor decision, another option because of whatever factors. And I think it's those things that we live and breathe while we're in those projects that ultimately we accumulate, learn from those, and prepare us for that.
And the decisions you make as a software architect stick around a lot longer. So if you put something in the wrong place in your code base, that's a decision in which you need to go back and refactor it, and it might take some time. You decide the whole company is going to move from, I don't know, Vue.js to React. That's a 5-year decision potentially. So yeah, you're right. You need that experience in order to kind of help make those informed decisions and know when the right decision to hold on something or to move forward on it.
It feels like gambling or something here, doesn't it? Right, we're going to hold, we're going to stick here, we're going to maybe place our bet on this technology. And, I don't think the analogy is too far wrong, is it? Because it is sometimes a bit like calculating the risks of option A, option B, and, using those judgments and understanding what's going on in the industry, what maybe certain external parties are saying about technologies, and using all that to inform, right, this is the strategy, this is the direction in which we go here.
Yes, very much so.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Super. Cool. So we got the context then. We know that the software architects are these leaders, these people who are helping us chart our course in terms of the next few years of our software engineering. I guess we were going to talk a bit around the tools side of things, weren't we? And maybe some of those aspects that maybe people haven't stumbled upon and used.
Yeah. So I think one of the, especially in larger organizations, one of the challenges is as you build out more and more teams in order to scale the organization, you want to do more. There's multiple ways of doing that, but one of the core ways is to add more people. And if you add more people, you then get to the point in which the team size is too big. You end up with too many communication channels, so you end up with multiple teams. And then when you end up with multiple teams, you then need to start thinking about how you communicate between those teams. You ideally want those teams to be as autonomous as possible, but you do need to be able to share the vision and the roadmaps and the other bits and pieces. And that's where some of these tools can kind of come in.
Absolutely.
I think the good one to start with is the Tech Radar. So I don't know if you've ever seen ThoughtWorks' Tech Radar.
I don't think I have actually. No.
So let me bring it up and show you. So ThoughtWorks produce a Tech Radar on a regular basis, and what this is, it shows you, if I just find the right thing, it's just loading now. Here we go. So they break technologies into techniques, platforms, languages, and tools, and then they will recommend that people should be adopting these technologies. So if we look over some of these, like Swift UI, for example, they're suggesting people should adopt them. They should be trialing them in a limited fashion. They should be assessing them, or they should be putting them on hold and not moving forward with them.
Interesting.
So this is a report they bring out on a regular basis that you can find on their website. However, you can create your own for your own organization. And where this is really useful is the new person joins the organization and they can see at a glance all of the technologies that you have that you're using. It also means that anyone starting a new project in one of these smaller teams can go, okay, am I using AWS or Azure? And they can come in here and they can say, okay, so AWS is on hold for our organization. And when you click on it, it gives you a bit of information about why. And you can see that would say Azure is under adopt, and it explains why. So it gives you a quick overview of everything that's kind of going on in your organization from a technology standpoint. You might be trialing something and another person in the organization can see that you're trialing it and then can have a conversation with you. So it's a decentralized way of everybody kind of learning what's going on as far as technologies are concerned. So so there is a builder for this. So ThoughtWorks do provide their own builder for building your own tech radar, and it takes a Google Docs or a CSV file, and then it also takes JSON as well. And you just put in here kind of which ring it's in, adopt or hold or whatever, which quadrant, which of the 4 things it's in, and then a description, which you get when you click on it. And you can see things that have moved in and out. But it's just one way of communicating across your organization, or at least the software part of your organization. What's the state of technologies? If you want to go and use the latest and greatest framework, is anyone else using it? Or have the company as a whole made an architectural decision to trial it, or actually they put it on hold because there was, I don't know, a cost implication or something?
Yeah, no, gotcha. And what I really like about this, something I've been not exploring so much, is something I've been doing for quite a while now, but really, I guess as part of my new role, emphasizing the message of is this concept of inner sourcing, and how we break down those barriers internally, how we share practices, and make it easier just to collaborate and contribute internally. And I love this as a tool to really easily communicate to everyone. These are the things which maybe we're trialing internally. These are the things which we've assessed and gone, you know what? Actually, there's some either compliance or policy or pricing, whatever reason, that states maybe don't invest the time in that way. I love this. This is really cool.
So what we're looking at on this screen is something called Backstage, which we will come back to.
Yes,
it's a developer hub. So it's a central place that all developers can come to. And they've implemented the tech radar in here. So this just to show you slightly different, because it shows it here as a list as well, which is quite nice. You can click on it and you can then get the description as you click on them, if that's been entered. And you can see the arrows show if it's been moved in or moved out recently.
Yeah, gotcha. Cool.
So yeah, that was the first thing really.
Awesome.
To show, as we were talking about kind of technologies and things.
Yeah, and I guess maybe the caveat also to add on as well, of course, is with a source such as this, I know we're thinking of Tech Radar as a concept rather than the source, but going back to the ThoughtWorks example, obviously ThoughtWorks is a very well-known company, but we still want to make sure we take a variety of opinions when we're kind of assessing those different options as well.
Yeah, when I was talking about kind of architect or software architect as a role, that doesn't necessarily mean you have one person on top that's making all the decisions all the way down. I actually work in a team of architects that work alongside other team of architects. I also like the roles I've chosen as a software architect are all still hands-on roles. So you will find in some very large organizations, they might have software architects that design solutions and pass them down to engineers. And I've always been keen personally to still be hands-on in the code, so I can appreciate, I might not be writing whole features, but I can appreciate the challenges the engineers are having. I can give more informed decisions and that side of things.
And that's the important bit, isn't it? It's embedding that realism into the oh, you know what, actually, maybe this wasn't the best choice because this is actually a bit more complicated to bridge with this technology, or, you know, whatever the scenario might be. So
Yeah.
you
And
get
I
that less
always,
theoretical aspect.
yeah. And I always, any decisions that we do make, they are collaborative.
Yeah,
And you've got to get everyone's input and things like that. Sometimes you might have opposing, points of view and
which
things,
is good.
but
Yep.
yeah. And that actually leads us quite nicely onto ADRs.
Mm.
Are you familiar with ADRs, or architectural decision
Yes,
registers?
very much, yes.
Yeah. So for those of you who haven't heard of them, they are ways of recording your architectural decisions. So I'll just jump across to this adr.github.io. And this is a really useful, I'll share all these links afterwards, obviously, but this is a really good document that outlines what architectural decision records are, how they fit in with the rest of other documentation that you might have. But, and there is a whole set of tooling and everything around it. But I think in a way, this document, although it's good, does cover kind of a little bit, I'm going to say, there's a lot in this document, and initially
Yes.
it might look like ADRs are this big complex thing, and the reality is that actually they are just, if I go to an example of an ADR, they are just a markdown file.
Right.
Oh, get the URL right. Here we go. They
There
are
you
just
go.
a markdown file that is recording your decision. So it's not changing your decision process or anything like that. But what we are doing is we're making a document for each decision that we make architecturally. And this lives inside your repo next to your code. So if anyone picks up that repo, they can look back through the decisions and go, oh, okay, this is why we chose to do this, or we chose to do that. There is a sort of a light format to it, but it is really flexible, and it's up to you how you go about using it. So in this case, we can just see context and problem statement, the options we considered, and what the outcome was. And we would number each of these would be a separate markdown file, and we just number them as 01, 02, 03. You can see a longer version here where we put in a few more options. But I guess the key thing is they're simple, they're lightweight, they're not a new way of making decisions. They're a way of recording them. So anyone that comes and picks up your Git repo in the future can easily see why and how. I think, Chris, you've said you've heard them before. Is it something that you've used?
Yeah, and I think and I noticed my camera has frozen, by the way, so I apologize for that. I'll sort this out in the background here. But yeah, I have, and I think the real important thing about this, because people might be thinking, wow, this looks like a lot of work, or, you know, is this just kind of almost covering myself and the decisions I've made? I think something we've talked about in the past on this channel is how important context is within anything architectural. And this gives exactly that. It gives that background in terms of this is what we, as it says right on the screen there, this is what we considered at the time. This was the outcome. And here's actually the reasons why we decided to go down this path. Here's the reasons why maybe we would have been swayed against going down this path, or swayed to go down this path. But ultimately, these things change all the time. So it might be something that, as you say, 2-3 years down the line, you actually look back at this and go, you know what, that was right at the time, but for where we're going and what we need right now, maybe it's not the most appropriate thing anymore. And that's absolutely fine as well. I think that's maybe one observation on my side. I think sometimes people look at these decisions and go, oh, but we've decided on that now. That's just how it is. It's there. We've got to keep it like that.
Yeah, for me, it's all about the whys. You can have conversations in, I don't know, Teams meetings or Slack or wherever, and that's fine, but they get lost quite quickly.
Yes.
And all you're left with is someone opening a project up going, why did they use that test framework?
Exactly.
Or why did they take that choice, that design pattern, software design pattern? And having this just keeps us a record really of that. And it's, as I said, saving it in the Git repo for me is really important, because people don't know where to go to otherwise. There might be some documents in SharePoint, there might be some documents on a OneDrive somewhere, and then how do you find those? What do you search for? At least if everything's living in the Git repo, it's with the code, and if it changes together, it should live together.
Fully agree. Fully agree. I'm fully with you. It's I love things like diagrams, etc. I'm personally, I use something like Draw.io quite regularly. It's out there, it's free. You can host your diagrams back in somewhere like GitHub as well. So
yeah,
I'm a fan of that.
Yeah, diagrams are an interesting topic, and it probably brings us on to the next area, really. So I've used UML for diagrams. I learned at university, and I've used it at a number of organizations. And also just general flow diagrams and various different methodologies. And I've created diagrams that have had that have used, say, the Azure icon set that you can download and things like that. And about a year or so ago, I came across the C4 model. Have you seen the C4 model before, Chris?
I think I've heard of it. I don't think I've actually dug any time into it, though.
It's a really interesting concept. So Simon Brown has this website, and he talks about it a lot. There's a 20-minute video here that covers it in much better than I would. But what it talks about in this video is some of the shortfalls of normal diagrams. I say normal diagrams, other diagram types. UML, for example, you have to go and learn a load of symbols and a load what everything means. And when you use the icon set from, say, Azure, people have to know what a web app icon looks like, which is great if you're a software engineer or an infrastructure engineer and you're in there all the time. But if you're an external person seeing the diagram, you don't know what any of it means. And people put a lot of acronyms in diagrams. So C4 model does a couple of things. One is it introduces the idea of 4 levels of diagram. So much like our maps here, you have a zoomed out version, you have a slightly more zoomed in, and you eventually end up with your street view. The diagrams work in exactly the same way. So we have a high level system diagram that talks about all the components in the bigger system. We have a container diagram, which goes into one of those and then starts to show how the inner components inside that container interact with each other. If we go down, there's an example here. So if we go, this is a container level diagram. So we've got a web app, a single page application, we've got a database. And then finally you get to, you eventually get to the sort of level 4, which is the code level. So that's the first concept of C4. The second one is that all the symbols are super easy to understand. We always have a title, some metadata, or not metadata, but some extra information, and then a description. All of the arrows only ever go in one direction and have a description about the relationship. So if I hand this to someone, say, doing a pen test or a third party doing an audit, they can pick this up not knowing a single thing about Java or ASP.NET, and they can understand how the application is structured. So it's a really good sort of diagramming system that anybody can kind of pick up and read the diagrams, but equally anybody can pick up and start producing the diagrams. So yeah, so I've been really sort of impressed using this technique with the different teams and getting the teams to diagram everything out really about how their systems work. Because again, as you end up with multiple software engineering teams, one reason to do that is to reduce cognitive load, reduce what everyone needs to know. But occasionally you do need to go to another team and understand how their system works at a high level. Or maybe you've got a new person joining the team and they need to understand how the components fit together. Yeah,
no, gotcha. And that was going to be one of my comments about this, is I really like how there's no domain awareness needed, let's say. It's very almost like the kind of self-documenting functionality or prophecy that we should have in code. It's self-fulfilling, isn't it? And I don't need to know what an Azure web app is or a static web app or whatever it is. I can just see from exactly from this example here that, right, we've got a web app, it's doing this by a single page app, it's making that call. very quickly and easily without knowing what the nuts and bolts of that application are. I can see at a high level what it's doing and what it needs to be there. Nice.
Yeah, so I definitely recommend people checking this out. It's c4model.com. And as I say, there's a good video at the top, but there are many other videos online as well about the concept.
Nice.
As for tooling around it, there are a number of open source tools. At the end of this document, it talks the difference between diagramming tools and modeling tools. So something like Draw.io or Visio being very much more that more of a diagramming tool where it has no context of what you're actually building. It's just for laying out diagrams. And then a modeling tool where it has a better understanding about the relationship. So there's an interesting discussion on that. But I've also used Draw.io. And the reason I've used it is that when you save a Draw.io diagram, you can save it as a PNG, display that in a Markdown document, but then go and open it back up in Draw.io, and it's still a fully editable diagram. So huge benefit when you're wanting to display your diagrams without people having to go and download Visio just to view them, or download whatever tooling you've used.
And you know what? You've now got me thinking, actually, thinking out loud here. So a pet project or something I need to go and explore. I do exactly that. I've got my XML, well, the .draw.io extensions, but however they're stored anyway in my repo, have the PNG files, as you say. But I'm wondering if there's a nicer way to be able to automate, maybe on a new check-in of that code, that it automatically goes and renders that PNG for you wherever you've referenced it. I feel like I've got a pet project I need to go and try out now. So thank you for the side project idea there, John.
You can embed the PNG that saves. It does embed the XML inside that PNG.
Oh, interesting.
So you can just open the PNG again, and it opens as a diagram.
Interesting.
So that's C4, and that doesn't mean UML is out the window or any other techniques. It's just that depending on your situation, depends on the right diagram to pick. So if you're doing a flow diagram or a sequence diagram, should I say, then I would go back to UML in many cases. But for these high level ones, and I found them particularly useful when handing it over to product owners, product managers, or people who aren't technical. These work really well. So while we're just talking about documentation a little bit there, one thing that's kind of appealed to me recently is the putting our documentation in our Git repo. And we see more and more of this happening anyway, with things like the Markdown files get rendered in GitHub or Azure DevOps or wherever, and we see folders of documentation. But what if we want to, and that's great, because if you pull down the code, you pull down the documentation, you can read it locally and all the rest of it. But what if we've got other people who don't know how to use Git, or you've got, you just want to quickly browse something without pulling down a whole repo? You could work it out. You could go to the GitHub and work your way around it. But something that's I'm seeing more of is generating websites from Markdown files. And there's two tools that kind of jump out that do this. One is MKDocs. This is I think it's Python based, but this will take Markdown files, and using a command line tool will generate you a static website, which is quite nice. So you can then start to build various static websites. If you want something slightly richer, then Docosaurus does a similar thing. However, you can start putting in menus and various other bits and pieces.
Nice.
So there's two options on how we can start exposing some of our documentation to a broader audience, but still keeping it in the repo right next to our code.
Gotcha.
Now,
and that's important, not just from just thinking of what you said there, not just an external audience, which is typically, I think, what we think of with docs, but actually I'm going to keep banging this drum about inner source again as well. if we've got other teams who want to collaborate or maybe build upon the functionality that we're building in our organization, actually making sure that the documentation is there for them is just as important. And I think sometimes we maybe maybe put lower standards in place just because they're internal, and we go, it's okay, they'll know, they can speak to us, kind of thing.
That kind of stuff shows when you get into larger organizations. At a previous company I started, I was one of 5 engineers.
Yeah.
By the time I left, sort of 6 years later, we were over 50 engineers. And what you get away with, I guess what get away with maybe the wrong word, but the shortcuts you take on quality come back to bite you later on when the organization's grown to a size. So putting in some of these techniques early on, and having that, making the barrier to editing easier and the barrier to finding things. As much as I like SharePoint for storing documentation, it is a challenge sometimes to find it, and it's not in our workflow. We're developers working in Git repos. I've then got to go onto a SharePoint site and search for the right thing in the right place and hope that I find it. Keeping it all in the repo together really helps, but yeah, it needs to be organized. And
and it's not just on you either in terms of going out and finding that and making sure it's there. It's also on the person to make sure they've uploaded it to that SharePoint site, which again, if they've got to go out to SharePoint, go and find the right place, go and categorize it, document it, tag it, whatever, they're probably going to put that lower on their priority list because they've got other things they need to work on.
But yeah, if I'm raising a pull request for some code, and like my colleagues would say, well, where are the tests, for example?
Exactly.
They wouldn't say that. I'd always write the tests, obviously, but you know, they would kind of flag it up. And it's now the same with documentation. It's like, oh, you've added this feature, but you've not updated the documentation, because it would all be in the same pull request.
That's it. So,
and that actually kind of brings us on to Backstage, which is a really interesting product that I learned about sort of mid last year. And I've kind of been talking a lot about it recently, and it solves so many problems. So Backstage was released by Spotify. It's now part of the Cloud Native Foundation. So it's an open source product.
I didn't know it was donated to the CNCF. That's cool.
Nice. So that only happened, I think, a couple of months back.
Okay.
So it's an open source product. But what they were trying to solve was this problem that they had lots of different teams, and all the teams were trying to be autonomous, which is great. And that's what you have to do really if you want to be able to scale, is have autonomous teams, because too many communication channels causes problems and challenges. But equally, they then needed another team to know about APIs, or another team to be able to find the documentation, or actually understand where everything was and all the rest of it. There is a good blog post, by the way, which I'll share the link with, which talks about why they made Backstage and probably does a better job of explaining it. But it is a developer hub that brings everything together. So the way I explain it is that it is centralized documentation managed in a distributed, decentralized way. So all the documentation lives in each and every Git repo that you have. However, Backstage will scan all your Git repos, no matter where they are. There's providers for GitHub, for Azure DevOps, for various other providers. It will scan the repos, and it will be looking for certain files in certain places. And it brings them together into a single portal. So we can have one website, and we can tell all engineers, go to the Backstage portal. And that is where you find the catalog of all of our software. And alongside the catalog, you'll then also find other useful information, which we'll have a look at in a minute. But the key thing is each team is looking after their own thing in their own Git repo next to their code. Yet it's all pulled together into a single place. So developers don't have to go, oh, this team's using Confluence, for example. This team's using SharePoint. This team's using Word docs in OneDrive. It's a single place. And it, as I said, all the code is living, all the documentation and all of the other bits lives alongside your code.
Yeah. And this was one that you introduced to me a few months back, and I'm really excited to get into this on the show because it blew my mind. Like, we'll see it in action here. It's awesome.
Yeah, so I'm going to bring up the demo website. So if you go to backstage.io, you can click on it and you can have a look at it. So Backstage is made up of a number of plugins. It's a plugin architecture, but out of the box, you get kind of 3 or 4 core ones. And the first one is the catalog, or the component catalog. So in each of your repos, you add a single YAML file to your repo. And once you've added that, it will appear in here. So we can see, if you've got a microservice architecture, you'd see each of your individual services listed out here. Clicking on any of them then shows you the relationship between the different services. So this is a little bit like the C4 diagrams, not as rich, but in that YAML file, you define the relationships between them. So these individual components are probably part of a system. So we can easily see, okay, from this component, what system am I part of? We can also put in resource dependencies. So maybe you've got databases and things that you want to do. This is conceptual as opposed to infrastructure, but it allows you to see what's being used. And here we can see the owner. Everything needs an owner. That owner might be an individual, or it might be a whole team. Team ownership of products is a really interesting concept, and I personally think it's really important that teams can own individual components. And again, it's another way of scaling. We can put in our life cycle. So is this on its way out? Is this a component we know we want to get rid of? Is it a production one, or is it a new component? You can also put in subcomponents. So say I've got a mono repo, a giant monolithic repo, and I want to break it up into 6 different repos in the future. There's 2 ways of doing that in Backstage. You can either put in 6 separate components and just store them all in one repo, and then as you break them out, they're still components, or you can mark them as subcomponents. So this is the catalog side of things, what you get to see. And you can jump to the source code straight away, and the little edit pencil will take you straight, if I open that in a new tab, that will take you straight to the file. It would do if I was signed in. It would take you straight to the file where you can go and edit that YAML file and make any adjustments. So it makes it really easy. We can also link out to any other resources. So if you've still got documentation in other places, that's fine. You just link to it in this links. And everything you see on this page here is all defined in a single YAML file that lives at the root of your repo. You can move it, but by default.
Yeah, and what I love is this is then that one-stop shop, regardless of what team you are, what repository provider you're running on, where your documentation lives, all of these different challenges that we get from empowering our teams to be, empowered. There we go. I kind of said it. We start bringing back some of that goodness of being able to have that one place to trace everything, to get to where we need to go.
And then from here, we can start utilizing some of the other plugins. So if your components provide an API, so this is a component here, the Shuffle API. If we go into here, we can see the API under the API tab, and it would list, it doesn't actually in this case, but it would list out any APIs that are both consumed and provided. And where this is really nice is that when you look at the APIs, say we go into this one here, we can actually see the Swagger documentation. So it lists out the contract for that API. So we can see here that that's all there. And you can link through from the component to the APIs that it produces or consumes. And that's also shown in that graph that shows you the dependencies. And we can see the Swagger docs, which is really nice.
And I'm assuming we get that same experience with the Swagger docs of being able to try an API, what properties we can pass in tokens, things like that. Is it that kind of rich as well?
Yes. If we go into one of these, you'll see the raw and a definition. You can see the raw. So it's just taking in the JSON or YAML file or whatever format you've got it in. And it's this that defines those things that you mentioned. So gotcha. Yes, those things are possible if they're defined in that.
Awesome. Nice.
So that's the home and the APIs. The next plugin that you kind of get out of the box is Docs, and this uses MKDocs behind the scenes, and that's how I kind of learned about MKDocs. What it's doing is that you have to add one more file to your repo, which is the MKDocs YAML file, and then it will take all of the markdown files that are in the docs folder of your repo and publish them as a navigatable static website.
Sweet.
So in this example here, we've only got one component, which is Backstage here, that's got documentation. But in my production system, we have sort of 35 different things here that are all listed. And it all links together. So if I come back in here and I go into here, you can see Docs tab here. So I can click on the Docs here and I will see the Docs if there are any. In this particular case, there aren't.
To find you. Yeah, gotcha. But it gives you that, to what you said earlier, that single point wherever you're working. Yes, it's not your Git repository, but it's all coming from the Git repository. And guess what? If you want to go and update it, there's going to be edit buttons in there, which are going to take you where? Back to the Git repository, right?
Exactly.
So, yeah.
Yes, if I go back into these docs here, we can see, as you rightfully say, there's a little pencil, and it will then, if I go into one of these, might just be the way this demo is configured.
Yeah, of course.
But yeah, normally you'd get you have the option of making a little pencil button there, and it will take you and edit it. You can click here, and it will take you to the code as well. Nice. So out of the box, you get the catalog, which includes the APIs. You get the docs, and then you get the Tech Radar, which we've already had a look at. On top of this, there is a whole load of other plugins. So everything from there's plugins for GitHub that can show you the build progress. So for that particular component, what builds are in progress. You get to see any pull requests. You can also get plugins for so these are the ones that are called, as I mentioned, the catalog, Tech Docs. Kubernetes has now made it in there as a core feature. We've got ADR.
ADRs, there you go. Yeah.
Azure pipelines, Circle CI, all of these additional ones, and you can add your own. So I've built a couple just for internal use, and extended things even further. We have a video library, so we've just been storing like recordings of meetings in blob storage. So nice. I've created a plugin now, and you can now browse through them and play the videos. So
nice.
Yeah, it's really extensible. And it's an open source project, so there's instructions on here how to pull it down. You then have to build it into a Docker image, and then you can deploy that Docker image. And the reason you have to do that is that each of these installs is going to be slightly custom. So you're going to have different plugins or different configuration. And I have a blog post on how to host this on Azure as well, that I can link to. So you can, as it's being a Docker image, you can host it anywhere. But
Gotcha. And I guess it would need to be a Docker image rather than like a static web app or something like that, because of some of the functionality behind the scenes there.
That's right. So it's API based. It has a REST API on the back end. So if we go back to the demo website, we can see here, when we're looking at these, it's that's making API requests back off to the back end API.
Gotcha.
That said, the docs are all static sites in their own right. You can either get Backstage to generate these for you on the fly, so it'll notice a change and rebuild it, but that puts a lot of extra work on the Backstage instance that you have installed.
Of course.
So what they recommend you do is you build it separately, and you just tell Backstage this is the location.
And point out to that. Yeah, gotcha. And nice.
There is a SaaS version if people don't want to host it themselves as well. That's provided. Provided by a number of companies, I believe.
Gotcha. Cool. Awesome.
So,
we've been on a journey there from, developers and that, I guess, typical view of going from dev up to senior dev and architect, which maybe actually it's more of a different type of role. And then looking at, I guess, what that role entails and how actually having that context and how these tools can then help make sure we've got that context as the team grows. That has been a whistle-stop tour of all things software architecture, John. That's been awesome.
Yeah, and even if you don't have architects in your organization or you're not an architect, that doesn't mean that you can't start using a lot of these. And what I think it all comes down to is communication, and being able to share information between the people in your organization. If you're a team of 5, you still need to share information when people go on holiday, when you get new staff in. Even if you don't need an architect to be setting the groundwork, and anybody can do that.
Yep. Oh, exactly. Spot on. Cool. So I guess then, as we start wrapping up here, any final maybe tips, tricks, words of wisdom that you wanted to leave folks with as we close out here, John?
Yeah, I think one of the points you made earlier was really important, that whatever decisions you make architecturally, or technology choices, they're the best decisions you can make at that time. And with everything moving so fast, you may look back on them and make, that was not necessarily the right choice. Or you might go, actually, that was an amazing choice, but it's the best at the time. And there's always reasons why people chose things. So don't look at code base and go, oh no, this is all terrible. There was a reason at the time people chose that. So yeah, keep open-minded is probably my final word of wisdom.
Excellent. John, thank you so much. Really great session. Lots, I think, for people to digest and take away there. And it reminds me that Backstage needs to be higher on my to-do list than it is right now. So I will certainly be adding that further back up on my list. But thank you very much, sir. Great session. So with that, folks, that is us done for the session here today. Hope you've enjoyed. If you have, please hit that like button. Please subscribe. And you know the deal. We will be back next week with some more excellent content. So until then, folks, thank you for tuning in for this one. And bye for now.